Quick look at the weather. It's going to be slightly warmer today, mostly cloudy though, rain pushing in from the west.
You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Justin Webb, Michelle Hussein and Zeb Soanes with a summary of the news.
Manchester Metropolitan University students studying in their first and foundation years will be taught online only for the next 2 weeks to try to stop the spread of coronavirus. Students living in two of the university's accommodation blocks were told to isolate for a fortnight after more than 100 tested positive.
Thank you, Zeb. It's 24 minutes to 8. What a start to university life for the freshers who found themselves having to isolate in their student accommodation. And even where there are no outbreaks, under restrictions and limitations to normal life that are inconvenient and unsettling, especially for those who've had little or no experience of being away from home. Niamh Thrippleton arrived at Reading to begin her zoology degree 9 days ago. She's been telling me what it's been like.
It's been okay. It's just been a lot different to what I expected.
So what are the restrictions you're under? What's your accommodation like?
Well, we're obviously not allowed to go out. Freshers is all online and stuff. We think only meant to socialise with our flat, but they haven't really been enforced or really, been made clear.
And how has that made you feel? You said that you don't feel you were quite ready for what you found. How is it different to what you were expecting?
It's just been a lot quieter, really. It's been harder making friends, and turning up and realising everything's going to be online is a bit of an anticlimax.
So no face-to-face interaction. I mean, you're a zoology student. Are you going to be in your room with all your tuition online?
Yeah, for the foreseeable, as far as I'm concerned, yeah.
And how do you feel about that? Because yours is a difficult course, zoology.
Yeah, well, it's, you'd think it'd be quite a lot of lab work, and it's, kind of worrying how am I going to do that online.
And that is in, if I can put it this way, in normal circumstances, as in your university has not had an outbreak. What are you worried about on that front? How do you feel about the prospect that people around you might start to test positive?
I just think the way, obviously, Manchester Met and other places have been locked down, being on your room in your own for 2 weeks with, no freedom there, I don't think I'd be able to cope with that. So it's kind of worrying.
Well, your stepfather, Chris Taplin, is also on the line. How do you feel, Chris, about what Niamh is experiencing only just over a week since she left for university?
Yeah, I do feel it's, she's certainly robbed of the experience that I had at university. And it is also really scary, really, when you read things about Christmas threat, not going home, when it is the first time they've moved out. And we basically kind of feel like we'd be some sort of lawbreaker if we went down there and busted her out. But it's just been the worst thing for a sort of mental trauma, really.
If there is an outbreak and she ends up being locked down in her halls, what will you do?
Certainly my wife has been saying, don't worry, we'll get you out. But I think it's obviously a not very sensible position to go and do that. But I think it would be making sure we get food to her and keep talking to her as much as possible. My problem with it being is how can they treat the students not like the adults in the local population where they're living? During lockdown, we at least were allowed out for an hour, 30 minutes of exercise and those sort of things. And from what I understand from the Manchester Met, they're not even allowed to do that at all. So I'm kind of thinking that I have some moral justification for wanting to get her out because they're actually treating them not like adults, really, and not like the fee-paying customers they are of that university.
Well, on that note, Niamh, do you feel that you are getting what you have paid for?
No, not at all. I think you pay all this, full fees for an online course, which I could have done at home.
Do you think you could have done it at home? Will there be any difference at all from doing it in a university setting compared to staying at home?
I think really the social aspect has kind of gone now, so yeah.
Niamh Thrippleton and Nicola Dandridge, the Chief Executive of the Regulator for Higher Education, the Office for Students, is on the line. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start with the teaching point, first of all, because the promise was blended learning. But there you have an example of an entirely online course, and that is not at a university that is experiencing an outbreak.
Look, these are exceptionally difficult times for students, and one feels desperately sorry for students in the situation that Niamh is facing. What we as the regulator for students in England have required is for universities to be clear with students as to what they can expect, whether the teaching is going to be online or face-to-face. And if there are changes, to communicate them to students. What we can't have is a situation where students don't know what's going on, that they're locked in their halls of accommodation and can't get hold of food. We really do need to make sure that students are communicated clearly.
Is there a case for a discount or a partial refund of fees?
Well, look, it's very early days. If students feel that they're not getting what was offered to them, then they absolutely should raise that with their university. And they also have the right to complain to the university ombudsman, the Office of Independent Adjudicators. But more broadly, in terms of tuition fee refunds, that's really a question for government. Our position, our focus is to make sure that students receive as high quality teaching and learning as is possible in the circumstances. And as I said before, that there is clear communications about what they're getting, whether it's going to be blended, face-to-face or online learning, so that they know what to expect.
But your office, the purpose of your office is to ensure that every student has a fulfilling experience of higher education. Clearly, that is not the case for everyone at present. It's not the case for a large number of students. So would you support a call for a discount or a partial refund on fees?
Well, it's going to depend what it is that students are getting. Universities have taken extraordinary steps to make sure that their campuses are as safe as possible and have improved the quality of their online teaching. And what we're seeing is that many students are getting a blend of face-to-face and online provision. For those who aren't, well, look, if they're facing a local lockdown, then universities and students are subject to, the public health situation like anyone else. I think if it continues and students are not getting what they were originally promised, then they should be making complaints to
yes,
to
I mean,
their
obviously
university.
they will. What I'm really asking for you as the Office for Students, whether there is a point, if this continues all the way through term, whether you will at least consider coming out one way or the other about whether they are entitled to get that sort of refund.
Well, students have legal rights as consumers. Our focus is on making sure that the quality of the teaching they received is as good as possible. And we're going to be looking very closely at what it is that students are receiving.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at patterns of complaints and speaking to student unions who are playing an absolutely pivotal role in providing
Should returns
support to
continue in
students.
this climate?
That is a public health issue, and that will have to be determined by universities liaising closely with their local health authorities. That's not something we can really get involved in. As I say, our focus is on the quality of teaching that students get, and also making sure that universities are communicating clearly. There's also another area we're particularly concerned about, which is making sure that universities provide support to students. There are real concerns about pastoral and mental health issues.
Yes, we heard that, didn't we, just then from Niamh, who was talking about how difficult it is to make friends. Nicola Dandridge, thank you very much.
17 minutes to 8.
It is 21 minutes to 9. What can universities do to try to give students some semblance of the quality education that they've paid for? And should those yet to return or arrive for the first time do so as scheduled? Well, Freshers' Week starts today at Nottingham Trent University, and Professor Edward Peck is the Vice-Chancellor there, also on the board of Universities UK. Good morning, Professor Peck.
Good morning.
Some of those who are returning or arriving for the first time might well be very apprehensive about doing so. What would you say to them?
Well, I think they should return to their university. They'll be getting their timetables now from their academic tutors. They'll be getting details of extracurricular social activity from their student union that may well take place online. So I think they should go to the university, engage with the offer that's being made to them. It won't be the usual offer. Nothing in life is quite as it should be at the moment. But I think it'll be a rich offer in a different way. And I think they'll find it a rewarding educational experience. And also there'll be opportunities for both social mixing where they're living, in groups of 6 when they go out, but of course lots of activity online.
You say it'll be a different offer. Of course, the thing that's not changed is the price. The tuition fees are the same as they as they would have been without the pandemic. For someone who looks at that, whose provision might be entirely online at the beginning at your university, what would you say if they wonder whether they're getting value for money?
Well, initially, most universities are starting with a blended offer. And of course, you can't assume that a well-designed blended offer, which combines materials you can watch online, then you'll have webinars and demonstrations with your tutor, with other students, backed up by face-to-face tutorials and then individual work.
Well, we heard from one student earlier who's not getting a blended offer, who's getting an entirely online offer to start with. Are there courses like that at Nottingham Trent?
There aren't. We're starting with a blended offer right from the outset. And of course, we do have some online programs, postgraduate programs, which we charge the same fee for as our face-to-face postgraduate program on the same course, because they can be, when well designed and well delivered, as rich and flexible a learning experience as one you might have if you're face to face.
So do you reject altogether? Do you reject altogether the idea that students might well have a case for getting some kind of refund or rebate on tuition fees if this continues?
I don't think we should go with that assumption at all. I think we should see how well the blended offer works. I think students will find it's a much better experience than anticipating. We've reduced the capacity of our teaching rooms by about a third, which means when you're having a seminar with your tutor face-to-face, there'll be far fewer of you in that tutorial group. So maybe fewer of them, but it's a much more intense experience. I think students need to experience that, and then we need to reflect together, I think, on what that takes in terms of the quality of the offer and how it's enabling students to meet their learning objectives. But I wouldn't go with the assumption it'll be a less good offer than the one they might have experienced if things had been different. What
if there are some students who end up being locked down in student accommodation at Nottingham Trent because there are confirmed cases? Would you consider in that scenario doing what Glasgow University has now said, that it will give students in that position a month's free rent?
I think we'd look at that when it occurred. We have very well-developed plans to support students who do have to be locked down in their accommodation. We have very few cases yet at Nottingham Trent. The students have just arrived this weekend. I think the students are responsible young people. They'll have seen what happened at the university around the UK, and I think that'll be a salutary message, actually. It's to some extent what happens at Trent, other universities, is in their own hands, and they can control the spread of the virus, as we can help them to do, by the actions they take.
Professor Edward Peck, thank you very much.
6 minutes to 9, two things we were discussing earlier in the programme. First, we were talking to a fresher at Reading University, and the university has got in touch, actually with rather good news, pointing out that teaching at the university is going to include a mixture of online lectures and socially distanced face-to-face classes and practical sessions. We were talking to a zoology student, and zoology students we are told, and she can now be told if she's still listening, they're going to have their first in-person class this Friday. More will start this week. And unless they have to quarantine at Reading University, students are allowed to leave halls for recreation, for socialising, etc. Now, the second thing we were talking about earlier on in the programme was the app. The NHS app, the COVID Track and Trace app, how it is working. We asked you to send in queries about it, and my goodness, you have, in some considerable numbers. And our technology correspondent, Rory Catherine-Jones, is on the line, who knows all about these things. Indeed, could have designed it himself had he not been already busy working for the BBC Morning.
One of the limitations is that Apple will not make the system available to any phones before the iPhone 6S.
Right, OK. Well, that's a pretty clear answer. Unusually clear.
Thank you.
During the course of the 3 hours, I think the clearest I heard. Rory Catherine-Jones, thank you very much.
And also Neve, the student, gets told on national radio that her first zoology class in person this Friday at Reading. That's it from us. Our editors, Nina Manring, Joel Moores, the studio director, Ben Andrews. Good morning.